For those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Dan Cuellar. I have a Twitter handle. It's up there. Please follow me. I don't really tweet that much, but at some point I feel like having a lot of Twitter followers will be useful. And when that day comes, I will appreciate it if you are one of them. Anyways, so I'm here today to talk about Appium. So show of hands, who here knows what Appium is? That's, I guess, the best I've seen in a while. Good. There must have been nothing else interesting on if you guys are coming and hearing about it. So for those of you who don't know, I'll go into what it is later. But first, before we get into the technical details of how it works and all that, I'm going to tell you a story. And it's the story of the birth of an open source project. So I don't know if any of you have ever witnessed the birth of an open source project, but it's a lot like the birth of a child. It's better to just hear about it than to actually be in the room, I think, let alone be the one giving birth to it. But in the end, it's quite satisfying, and you do come to think that that was probably a good idea. Has anyone here had a child? Okay. Did I describe it correctly? Okay, good. Good. I don't have one, but that's how I've been told. Anyways, so I'm going to tell a story about how this project came about. And I tell it because hopefully you learned something from it. I certainly did. So it all starts with the most terrifying 5 words in software testing. Does anyone know what those might be? What? Fuck up? That's 2 words. Is it 5 in Polish? Oh, not, okay. No, these are the most terrifying 5 words in software testing. Does anyone know why these are the most terrifying 5 words in software testing? Okay, well, I'll explain to you. So, how many of you use Android in this room? How many of you use iOS? Oh, all right, good. So, a lot of you don't have to deal with this terror. But the gist is, up until, let's say, the last year, the App Store review process at Apple was quite lengthy. No one really knows what went on. I think it just sat in a queue. I can't imagine they spent 5 days running static analysis on it. If they did, they should probably run different static analysis or something. But anyway, the old process, the way it worked was you shipped a piece of code, something horrible was broken in it, customers got angry, you find out about it. It takes you 20 minutes usually to fix it because it's usually something stupid. Someone copied and pasted something and forgot to change a variable name, something like that. But in the meantime, no one's able to chat on the dating site. No one's able to buy anything. Things are bad for business, and your boss is quite angry at you. So after you've made the fix, you beg Apple, you check the box saying this is urgent, and you submit a new build to the App Store where even on an urgent build, like 3 days later, they get back to you and they tell you, oh, there's something wrong. Please start over. So then you go and I don't know, you correct the spelling of something in your description or whatever they're angry about today. And then you do it again, and meanwhile, money is falling from the sky and everyone's screaming at you. And it's just a bad experience. But then, 2 weeks later, you finally get that patch out, and, well, no one has auto-update turned on anyway, so a lot of users still can't chat or buy anything, so it's pretty bad. But eventually they will download it, and maybe a month, month and a half, once they're bored or something, on a Saturday, they eventually update it, and the bug is fixed. So this differs quite a bit from the Android release cycle. In general, Android has never taken more than an hour to push out a fix. I believe Android also had the auto-update feature years before Apple did, and it is more common for them to have it on, I believe, or at least it used to be. Nowadays, I think it comes on by default in iOS, but for a while it was opt-in, which was quite annoying. Anyways, this all sort of differs from the move fast and break shit mentality that we sort of got used to during the .com boom in the beginning of the Web 3.0 social networking thing, where we're agile, we make up what we're doing, we make mistakes, but we fix it really quickly. All the code lives on a web server, so if we ever break anything, we upload new code to the web server, and instantly, problem fixed. So pretty cheap to try things out. Bugs don't cost you a lot. It's okay to make mistakes. Not anymore in 2008 or whenever the App Store came out. So it reminded me of a similar challenge I faced earlier in my career. So show of hands, who knows what this is? A few of you, okay. It's the older ones. So for those of you under the age of, let's say, 25, probably 30, I don't know. Back in, 2000s, we used to ship software on optical media. I think this is a DVD here, and that's lovely Windows XP. And how this is similar to the App Store is that you don't control the distribution mechanism. In this case, you have to mail or put on the shelves a physical disk that your customers then go buy. Whenever there's a patch, you ship them another disk, or maybe there's like a patch update or something. But in general, the internet wasn't fast enough to send 700 megs to everybody back then, and so we shipped disks. And if you made a mistake on a disk, it was literally expensive to fix because you had to go and you had to repress a bunch of disks. So when I worked at Microsoft, there were always the legends of the person who added a comment and somehow caused Windows ME to have to be reprinted. Not that that did it any good. It was still shit. But someone made it have to get reprinted from a single mistake. And the App Store sort of mirrors this in a bit in that the code is now in the user's hands to update, so you better not make a mistake. And so there's two obvious ways to go with this. One was, what was the testing process like on a product like that? So I didn't work on Windows, but I worked on Microsoft Office. I worked on Outlook, and I worked on Excel when I was at Microsoft. And we had lengthy 3-month code freezes, and eventually it got to the point where whenever anyone wanted to make a code change, there was like a guy with a briefcase with nuclear launch codes in it. And after a bunch of generals met and they picked over the 2-line, 3-character change, someone got the briefcase out and they hit the digits and we made the change. And that went on for months. We all used it in-house. But when you work at a startup, obviously waiting 3 months between releases and having code freezes is just absurd. Not going to happen, not going to make the needle move, not agile. So that was not an option to institute that sort of strategy. But I thought, what was the other thing we did really well? And the other thing we did really well was test automation, be it unit tests, integration tests, end-to-end tests, UI tests, all those kind of tests. So I took a look around, and this is 2010 or whatever it is, a long time ago. And these were the tools on the market. Does anyone know what any of these tools are? Ah, Wprowadzenie, good. One person knew what Wprowadzenie was. Yeah, these tools were all crap, so it's good that you don't know what they are. And they're all dead now. I think Wprowadzenie actually lives, but no one should use it. There are better tools now. Apple finally killed the one on the left, and PhoneMonkey probably isn't dead, but it never really lived. Anyway. So anyway, these were your options out there, and they all sucked for different reasons, so I'll sort of quickly describe why they sucked. The one on the left is UI automation JavaScript. Apple thought, let's make an Objective-C programming language for our iPhone, but then when they want to write the tests, make them learn JavaScript. That'll show them. That was stupid. They also put the testing framework in the profiler, so that thing you use to find memory leaks and functions that take up lots of processing power, that's where your automation lives. That's an odd place to put it, but all right. Anyways, there's a bunch of other problems with it, but those are the two main ones. You're writing JavaScript tests, and you're writing Objective-C apps. Two different languages. And anyways, I don't know why you would ever opt into making JavaScript a language for anything anymore. We're kind of just stuck with it because Netscape put it in a browser, Microsoft copied them, 2 people agreed on something, and then no one's ever sorted it out since. So I don't know why you would willingly choose JavaScript. Anyway, moving forward, Wprowadzenie requires you to build it into your app. You have to put the framework in there, and it runs sort of as part of your app. So you're modifying the application you're testing, which isn't ideal. Also, it's a little bit far removed from the DOM. It's kind of a little more abstract than some of the other tools that came afterwards. And then I won't even dignify PhoneMonkey with the description. Just, I don't know, Wikipedia it if you really want to know what it is. And then forget what you learned. So anyways, everything was shit. And I said, surely there must be a better way to do this. And so I played around with some stuff. I talked to the iOS development lead, and we came up with an idea. Well, UI automation JavaScript isn't so bad except for that JavaScript part and that profiler part. Oh, and that part where you have to write your tests and you have to run them as like a static file. So you can't real-time do anything. You have to sort of just feed it like 20 lines of JavaScript and it spits out like an XML file with what happened. So it's not line by line. It's sort of just all at once. So what if we could fix those things? So we came up with the idea like how to fix it. So step 1, remove the profiler from the equation. Fortunately, Apple had written a command line interface for the profiler that allowed you to run tests. Boom. Running them the command line that's not in the profiler anymore. Devs like command line. We're happy now. Problem 1 solved. Problem 2, JavaScript. Well, Apple sandboxed their framework quite thoroughly. They removed all the fun bits of JavaScript, like XHRs and anything that basically communicated with the outside world. But they did leave one loophole. They had a function in there called perform task with timeout or something like that. And what that did was it ran a shell command on the machine running the tests. So when you have access to run a shell command on a machine, any hacker would kill for that. I mean, that basically means you can do whatever the hell you want. So I used the shell command Python to build an actual cool thing that would interpret the commands, and a few others. So we built this stupid loop. We uploaded a static file, so we got around that. It was just a while true loop that went and waited for sequentially ordered text files to appear in a folder by running the cat shell command. And then when cat didn't write to standard error, we knew it was good. And then they left eval in there too, which is a very useful piece of JavaScript. Eval lets you take a string and execute it as though it's code. So we wrote a Python server that would then dump these sequentially ordered text files with valid JavaScript automation commands. And then this loop would come pick them up, execute them, and then dump an output file. Appium is much more sophisticated now, but this was the original implementation. So we've now broken it out of the sandbox, and it's running commands in real time, and it's talking to Python. So we wrote an HTTP server in Python using Bottle framework that then implemented the Selenium protocol, which already had library client bindings in every language you'd ever want to use. So now we've gotten rid of the language requirement. So if you want to write your test in C#, go for it. If you want to write your test in Ruby, go for it. If you want to write them in Objective-C, well, someone needed to write Selenium binding, so we wrote that too. And so now you can write your tests and your program in the same language. What a novel idea. So anyways, built this thing, loved it, started using it. It was a while before it started paying dividends, but we now had a worthwhile automation framework. And so I went to a conference in London next year, and I gave a talk on something different. I gave a talk on like sharing tests between different platforms. So we had a website, and we had an iPhone app and an Android app. And I showed that if you use common interfaces for each platform, and you implement sort of the logic underneath, you can share your tests. So a test for us, an end-to-end test might look like disable an account, try and log in, make sure you're told you can't log in, or take a subscriber, message a non-subscriber. He shouldn't be able to reply back to you, but you should be able to reply to him. So when you write it at that level of abstraction, it can be on Android, it can be on the web, it doesn't matter. So we used our hacky framework to implement the iOS side. We used for Android, I forget which one came with it at the time. Maybe instrumentation, maybe UI Automator, I don't remember. And then obviously for the web, we used Selenium. And so we shared our tests. So we'd write one test, and then as long as all the methods were in the interface on each platform, it executed perfectly. I showed that to people, and all anyone could see is like, why is Selenium driving an iPhone? That seems cool. Why don't you talk about that? Shut up about that thing. No one cares. Show us that thing. So I gave a lightning talk on it at the end of the conference. And there was a big round of applause, and everyone cheered, and it felt like this cool moment. Like finally, oh, this thing, it's cool, everyone likes it. And then I don't think I got a couple emails after the conference. Someone wanted to buy it for like $1,500. Some other people thought it was something it wasn't. But after 2 weeks, I had scared away anyone who was interested in it, and it generally sat around and nothing happened. Until one day, I got a call on my phone. I don't know how I got a call on my phone, because I don't give my phone number to people that I don't know. But Jason Huggins, the guy who created Selenium, gave me a call. I think I registered for the conference with my phone number, and he ran the conference. I think that's how he got it. But anyway, he gives me a call and says, come bring your thing you showed at the conference 6 months ago to the pub. Take it to the pub. One of my guys is going to look at it. And we're going to try and do something with it. And I'm like, okay. So I bring it over there. His guy's fiddling around with it. And they're not, at this time, I've converted the code to .NET from Python because we were a .NET shop, and I just wanted to keep everything in one language. And so they don't know how to use .NET. They're all open source people. And back then, .NET wasn't open source. And so I sent them a Python prototype I had, and then they go off. No one tells me anything. And a few months later, I get an invitation to another conference. So unbeknownst to me, what Sauce Labs has done is they have gathered all of the framework creators in one room in San Francisco, and they intended, unbeknownst to us, to put us in a giant steel cage and have our frameworks battle it out for which one will be the future of test automation. So, also unbeknownst to me, they had secretly been contributing stuff to my framework in a separate repo without telling me, and they had made it much more awesome than it was. And so we go and we all give talks, and I meet all the people. I meet the Calabash people, I meet the Frank people, I meet the Sikuli people. All the people are there. And then at the end of it, Sauce Labs demos this framework, which doesn't have a name at this point, running in the cloud. And I'm like, oh, that's really cool now. You can just, like with Sauce Labs, you can dial up an HTTP server and have a mobile device in the cloud. That's really neat. And so from there, now Sauce Labs, who actually knows how to do open source, runs an open source project. And 4 years later, we are the most popular one. And we have Amazon, and we have Microsoft, and we have Google, and we have everyone contributing to it, which is really neat. So, quick story of open source. I have a whole different talk I do, but not today on that. But anyways, leaving that for now, what is Appium in one word? It is an implementation of the Selenium JSON wire protocol to test applications. I need to remove the iOS and Android because it supports Windows Universal Platform. It's one of the TV platforms, and it supports Mac applications too. So it actually does all the apps. So any app you have, it'll do it. But it's most popular for Android and iOS. And it is currently the most popular solution out there. We have a pretty simple philosophy. This is stolen, and it's owned by the Appium project, but we sort of stole it from Jason Huggins, who created Selenium. When he was looking for a solution for the mobile test automation problem, these were sort of the guidelines he had in mind. And so first is only use standardized APIs and techniques. So most of the frameworks on the market use private APIs, or they forced you to install interesting things into your app that did things they weren't supposed to, that kind of stuff. We use only the vendor-provided frameworks. I'm lying a little bit. There's a few things that don't. But in general, if you want to only use them, you can. There's a few interesting things, I think, with iOS that don't. But in general, they do. And we use currently XCUI test framework, the brand new one from last year that's in Swift for iOS now as of 2 weeks ago. And if you have an older legacy device, we'll automatically convert the automation to UI automation JavaScript for you, so you can test 8 and below and 9 and over. And then for Android, we just released the UI Automator 2. Previously, we were on UI Automator 1 with legacy support using instrumentation for Android devices API level 16 or lower. So Appium will do all of that magic for you. You know Selenium. You talk Selenium to it. It will translate it to instrumentation if you have an ancient Android device. It'll translate it to UI Automator if you have a less ancient Android device. And if you're feeling lucky, it'll translate it to UI Automator 2 for newer Android devices. We just released that, so hopefully it works. Haven't seen too much yelling about it. Anyways, the second part of the philosophy is code in the language if you're choosing. So the biggest barrier to entry on most frameworks for people is they have to change language. Most of the frameworks out there supported 1, maybe 2 other languages. Usually they were just whatever the people who created the thing liked. Most of them were Ruby for some reason. I don't know why, but people who make frameworks like Ruby, I don't know. I think that shows poor judgment, but anyway, nonetheless, they like Ruby. But we always supported everything because we implemented the Selenium server layer. It can talk to whatever has bindings for it, which is currently about 12 languages, including Perl and some other odd ones that you can use if you want. Thirdly, we don't want to modify the application we're testing, so you don't install some rogue HTTP server in your app that runs private API commands that Apple may or may not change. We just do everything externally using the tools they provide. And then lastly, we wanted to keep it free and open source. I was never really interested in founding a company that could do this, so that means free and open source, doesn't it? Cool. So if you want more of a visual of how it works, this is the gist of it. You have a test script. You write your test script in whatever language you like. You can write it in C if you want. Whatever you want, assembly, I don't care. As long as it can send HTTP requests, you're good. And it sends those to our server using usually the bindings provided by the Selenium project. Our server then takes your requests and then converts it to the appropriate native supported automation framework commands, executes it on your device, and then replies back to you with a protocol-compliant response that the framework can then interpret. So you don't have to worry that, oh, this is an ancient Android device, it only talks instrumentation, or this is a new one, or this is an old iOS device, or this is a Windows phone. You don't care. Appium does all that for you. So you can unify all your app automation under one umbrella using a framework that you already use for the web, which is quite powerful. So if you have an automation team, if you're lucky enough to have an automation team, they don't have to learn anything new. They can automate your website. They can automate your mobile app. If you don't have one, even better. I've always liked developers writing the end-to-end tests. You don't have to learn a new language. If you write your Android app in Xamarin, you can write this in C#. If you write your Android app in PhoneGap, you can write this in JavaScript. If you do it in Java, there's Java, Objective-C, and then kind of Swift as well. But there's not much barrier to actually having a real Swift implementation. So anyways, that's the gist of how it works. So sort of numbers for scale. Over the last 3.5, 4 years, we're now at about 4,000 stars on GitHub, which makes us, I think, one of the 300 or 400 most popular, maybe it's 1,000 most popular projects on there. In JavaScript, we're towards the top. 2,000 forks, which is really high. And then we have over 150 different people who commit to the project. And we've had over 150,000 downloads of the 1.0, but that was 3 years ago, so it's probably closer to 250,000 or something at this point. And we fixed over 4,000 issues, which is a two-edged sword in that how do we have 4,000 issues? Hey, but they're all fixed, so anyway. So this is sort of what it looks like. So I'm not going to bore you to death. This is a Java user group, so we got Java code here. It's just Selenium. The only difference is two things. One, you have these new capabilities. For Android, you just sort of need to tell it what app you want to use. And even then, newer versions of Appium don't require you to do that. And then you kind of got to give the device a name. Oh, this is the iOS one, sorry. On iOS, you just got to tell it what version the device is so it knows what framework commands to use. And then that's generally it, and where the app is you want to test, or what the name of the app is. And that's about it. And then the only other difference is in Java, you have to give it a slightly different class when you construct it. But beyond that, once you do that, it's all Selenium. And even then, that's sort of Selenium anyway. For Android, same thing, just more information you have to give it. But like I said, in the new version of Appium, a lot of this is now optional. And the nice thing about Android is Android, you can even automate apps that you don't own, which is quite fun. On iOS, that kind of works, sort of. Anyways, finding elements is the same as always been in Selenium. These are the three main ways we do it in Appium. So you have your classic by class name, which would be like by HTML tag if you're on Selenium. So UIA button for an old version of an iPhone, XCUI button for the newer ones. I think we may automatically do that mapping for you if you have old code and use the new stuff. Same thing, you can use fully compliant XPath. So in this one, we search the entire DOM for the first UIA text field. And then we also have the accessibility IDs. So resource IDs in Android or accessibility identifiers in iOS. Unless you don't have an accessibility identifier, then it's the accessibility label. And if you don't have that, then it's the name of the element. And then if you don't have that, it goes to the text. Apple made their framework very weird. It sort of makes up things as it goes. And then to actually do stuff, it's quite simple. So we didn't bother renaming click to tap, but I think everyone gets that click is tap. Send keys just like Selenium. There are helpers for like swipe and things, but there's also, we support more custom gestures with a thing called, I think it's called mobile actions. So it's like a builder, so you can say, move this finger here, let 10 seconds elapse, do that, and you could build some complex drawing or whatever you want to build as well. But you'll notice it's just friendly Selenium code that you know and love if you've ever written Selenium. Probably not love, but that you know if you've ever written Selenium. Web views. So each web view in your app is a context. So the way Appium works is it has several automation contexts. So by default, you're talking in the native context, which on iOS is your Cocoa layer. On Android, it's just the UI layer, whatever. Material design, what's the framework called in Android? I don't know. But it's your native DOM, so not your web content. But each time you have a web view, it shows up as a different context. And you can switch to it using, in Java, it's the context command. In C#, I think it's switch to.context or something like that. And once you switch contexts, all the automation runs in that context. So imagine you have a web view on your app. You switch to the web view, and you just write Selenium code in the web view, and you're searching through HTML, JavaScript's executing. You're in that world until you switch out of that context back into the native world. So quite useful. And we support fully web views on iOS and Android. If you do some really crazy stuff, like I work somewhere where we have a Cordova app that uses Angular and runs in Crosswalk. So at that point, I think Appium may not work as well as we'd like it to. But provided you're not doing anything that weird. For those of you who don't know what I just said, we have an app that runs inside a browser on iOS and Android. But on Android, we replaced the OS browser with one we supply called Crosswalk, which is just a dump of Chrome. But then on top of that, we're running Angular, so not regular Selenium, but Protractor. Anyways, it's a giant mess. And I think we finally did get it working. But the other option was just we disabled Crosswalk for our test builds, and then we could run it normally. The point of using Crosswalk is that you make the browser not a variable in your app. So if someone has an old Android phone, they're not running like the Android browser with your thing or some old version. When you use Crosswalk, it dumps like a Chrome binary in your app, and that's the version your app uses. And if the user upgrades to new OS, they still have the same one. So the idea is to reduce bugs and increase speed because older phones won't have Chrome in there. Anyway, I digress. So anyways, that's Appium. We just released 1.6 2 weeks ago. There's some cool new stuff in it. So Microsoft wrote Windows Universal App Support. So previously, some Russians had written Windows Phone App Support and Windows Support. And then Microsoft, rather than modify that, they just said, we'll rewrite the whole thing. And they did, and it works. And now it's natively supported, which is really cool. Not that the work the Russians didn't do was good, but Microsoft rewrote the thing, and they support it now, and that's really cool. And they will support it going forward. If you have Visual Studio, Appium is now the option for GUI automation there. And it's no longer whatever the hell it used to be called, something really Microsoft-y, like core Microsoft.test.automation or something. I don't remember. We also got lumped into this JS Foundation thing. So jQuery Foundation is now called the JS Foundation as of last week. They had a big party in London. They didn't invite me, but not bitter about that at all. But they did join about 16 projects, Grunt and I'm trying to remember Webpack and jQuery and us, and I think there's 12 others that I don't remember. We're all one big project, so we share resources and things now. So Appium has a good backing if it didn't already. We're part of a foundation, which is probably important. We also released the new iOS backend. So last year at WWDC, Apple announced they were deprecating the, well, they didn't announce they were deprecating the framework. They sort of told us in a private room they were deprecating the framework with the next version of Xcode. So the last year we've been working on an upgrade to use the newer framework, which up until like 3 weeks ago I don't think even worked without our code on top of it. But I think it all came together now, and people are using it, and it works. So kudos to Apple for 1 year after releasing a framework actually making it do what it's supposed to do. And now because it does what it's supposed to do, our code also does what it's supposed to do. The cool guys from UITV, which is a TV app writing platform that a lot of major television people use, also added support. So we support TV apps. Don't know about Apple TV yet, but someday. And then we also upgraded the Android implementation to use UI Automator 2. That's been out for several years now, so we finally got around to switching from UI Automator 1, which gives us a much faster, more stable Android implementation. Coming soon. Mac app support is already there, but it's going to get better. There's some people at a company in America that are currently working on the legal process of releasing their fixes. It should be done shortly. New GUIs and better docs. I already talked about Mac stuff. So let's talk about some other fun stuff. So I have a little extra time. I think about 5 minutes till I need to take questions, right? 10 minutes left. 15, I have 15. Okay, good. So some other cool things while you're here. If you want to run Appium, you can run it on your local machine, but that's not exciting. There are all these places that will sell you it in the cloud. I'm, of course, missing Xamarin, who just announced they are supporting Appium in their cloud. So everyone is pretty much on board at this point. So if you don't want to have a copy of every Android device ever made, these people do want to have that, and they want to sell it to you, which is cool. So if you ever have a bug that only repros on a really weird version of Android, you can get access, and your tests will run on it, and you can make sure it never happens again. So anyways, I also highly recommend Sauce Labs. They support the Appium project very well. Some of the other people don't, but they exist, so they're on the slide. But yeah, Sauce Labs and Test Object for sure support us thoroughly. Some other cool stuff. just checking out. I don't get paid to endorse this stuff or anything, but like, if you ever want to look into visual testing, Appium is supported by Applitools, which is a really cool visual testing framework. It is proprietary, though, so you have to pay some money, but it's worth checking out. If you don't want to pay any money, Seculi integration also works. I don't have a link, but there's a Appium forum post about how to use Seculi to find by image in Appium. Kind of fun. And then I don't know why I listed TestDroid. I think I copied the wrong thing. Other cool questions I always get. I'm just heading off the question section right now before people ask these things. People ask, can you run 2 Appium phones at once? And here's Jonathan Lips to show you that you can, in fact, run 2 Appium phones in one test. So he's going to run 5. And so I don't know if I don't have the sound hooked up. But what Jonathan has here is he's going to have a band played by Appium-controlled mobile phones. And you'll see on the screen we'll have 4 Android phones and 1 iPhone. The 2 Android phones will be keyboards, 2 Android phones will be drums, I think, and then the phone will give him the lyrics. And so this is all being orchestrated by Appium, 5 devices at once. And so they're going to be Jonathan's backup band. So this is a program they wrote, I believe, that takes MIDI files and siphons it off to different phones. So it's all right. It's, you know, it's no Chopin, but it's good enough for me. But in case you weren't sold on that, not to be one-up, Jonah, who used to work at Sauce Labs, wrote a 16-channel Appium MIDI decoder called the Appium Jukebox. And they used to bring this thing to conferences, but it's in America. But back a slide. But I'll just show you a video of it. We'll fast forward this. So here's our big server with, about 16 Android devices plugged into it. Maybe there's some iPhones too, I don't know. It's amazing how much power that many USB devices take. And we've mounted them all here. Each one is playing a single instrument from the MIDI file, all being controlled by Appium, of course. Anyway, you get the idea. So no one asked me the multiple device question today. You've been warned. Cool thing that I just like to show. I didn't bring this with me today because I broke it a few weeks ago and I haven't repaired it, but we also support robots. So if you're ever interested in using a robot to automate your tests, we fortunately have you supported. So this is a demo from a conference a few years ago. So I'll explain how this works in a minute, but I'm going to show you a robot sending a tweet using Appium. So this robot is going to type a tweet on the keyboard. Appium is controlling that robot, and I believe that is the world's first robotically sent tweet. No one has ever challenged me on this assertion, so I'm going to stick with it until someone calls me out on it. But if anyone can beat 2012, so be it. Anyways, you may be wondering, that seems kind of tricky. How does that all work? It is tricky, but the nice thing is, in Appium, it's just 2 parameters. So the robot runs on an HTTP server. You just give a port and address, and you launch the code, and then Appium will take all your touch events, and instead of sending them to the automation framework, it'll send them to the robot, and he will do all your touching, swiping, and tapping. If you're interested in the math, I'm running low on time, so I'll just breeze through it. The gist is, we can calibrate the phone by a calibration app, where we lower the robot's finger inch by inch till it touches the screen. That way we find out where the phone is. Then we move a couple millimeters up, a couple millimeters down, put it all in a matrix, translate it all, some linear algebra later, and we can find out how to map coordinates between the real world and the device screen. So anyways, someone in here understands that. They can explain it to you later. At one point I understood it, but that was years ago. So I'm running long, so I will take questions.
I have a question. What about realizing the swiping? Because in the native, when you use a DB event, you can write directly keys and text, like a shell event and etc. in console. But swiping contain very long lines to make only single touch of screen. What is the what kind of this is realizing by Appium?
Appium doesn't swipe with ADB. It uses UI Automator to do the swiping, and that has proper touch action, gesture, APIs. But yes, with ADB you can do most of the keyboarding and things, but we don't use ADB for that. And we try and send most things to UI Automator, since ADB is sort of that's not really what it's supposed to do, but it is like a debugging tool, so you can just tell it whatever and it'll do it.
Hi, are you able to hear me? Actually, I'm not from Jamaica, but I like this t-shirt. So, well, I've got a personal question for you. Do you know that your software, Appium, is involved with beating world records in some games like Piano Tales? Because people building robots, which they're automated, and there is no some nasty Chinese man, but your software.
Please tweet me what you just said, because I didn't know that. And there's some people who might find that funny, and I'm not going to remember it. I'll put my Twitter up in a second. But
so you are part of a success for a world record in Piano Tales, so congrats.
I'm not part of this, but funny story, you mentioned that. Someone was at a conference who I worked with, who knew I worked on Appium, and this was years ago when the robot first came out, and it was before Android by default enabled maximum number of tries on your password. And what some guys did is they invented a program that when you steal an Android phone, you just put it under there and it'll type all the possible passwords until it unlocks. So someone used Appium for that too, and no one told me. But then, like a year later, Android fixed that. Anyway, I like to do these conferences for several reasons, but one of them is also to sort of share my story of Appium with you, and not for the reason of like, oh, hey, look at me, I made this cool thing, but more for just disruption in general of the industry. And what I mean by that is this. So I'm going to leave you with one quote, and here it is, and it's from Steve Jobs, a man I don't particularly like, but I like this quote. So I'll use it, I'm not above that. So he said once, life can be much broader once you discover one simple fact. Everything around you that you call life was made up by people that were no smarter than you. You can change it, you can influence it, and you can build your own things that other people can use. Once you learn that, you will never be the same again. And Appium is living, breathing proof of that. Like I told you the story, I looked at everything that Google and Facebook and all the allegedly smart people were using, and it was total crap. And there was something better that could be done. And while I often look at things and say they're crap and then try and do it better, as we all developers do, and 99% of the time I'm wrong, I was right this one time. And so have hope. You will at one point be right like this. So I would encourage you all to share your ideas with people, create open source projects, do conference talks. Likely your ideas are utter crap. Most of mine are as well. But occasionally you might just strike it lucky, and you might have a good one, and you might help a lot of people. And so if any of you has an Appium killer in here, please don't hesitate to kill it. My children will not go hungry. I don't have any, as you learned earlier. But, you know, I don't get paid to do this, and we all benefit from contributing good working open source software to everyone. So I will leave you with that, being that it wasn't someone at NASA or the NSA, or it wasn't one of those people that Elon Musk has that lands rockets on ships or whatever the hell they do. I work at a dating site, or I used to work at a dating site. I am no smarter than any of you guys, so you can do it too, and give it a go. Go to conferences, talk to people, share your ideas. It's really worthwhile, and open source things that you think other people might find useful. And with that, I leave you with all of those things. My Twitter's not on there, but someone will tweet at the conference or something what he just said, what Jamaica just said. But if not, find out more about Appium there. If you're not using it for your mobile automation, I don't know what you are using, but it's not as good as Appium, unless it's that secret thing I just talked about, in which case open source that and kill Appium. But if it isn't, give it a go. It's really good for sharing tests across platforms, and it's really good for keeping yourself always up to date without having to rewrite all your tests every time Google or Apple changes their API. We solve a lot of that problem for you, and we do a lot of that maintenance for you. And if you use Appium, you get access to things like cloud providers that all implement our protocol, and our forums, and all the good resources we have for sharing in your concerns and problems and helping you. So using a standardized protocol is good for everyone. We don't make any money on it. We're open source. We're just out there to get everyone doing something sane with mobile test automation instead of the insane things they've done in the past. And with that, that is all I have. And have a good party after the conference.
Thank you very much.